I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency! Thanks, losers.
Hey everybody, welcome again to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. I am your host, Bob Lung, with Big Guy Fantasy Sports. My co-host with me every week and has been for quite a while now, Mr. Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going? South of the border. No, south of the border. South of Florida.
I'm not quite in Mexico.
Yeah.
Not quite there. But yeah, no, it's good, man. A little overcast today, a little rain rolling in. We need some rain. But other than that, life is good, man. I'm not on any PEDs or anything.
That's good. Yeah, stay off those. Stay off those. I need performance-enhancing drugs, but I call it Diet Mountain Dew. And I drink it every morning. It's the only way I can get out of bed.
The DMD.
Exactly. Rain is the last thing we need here. If it doesn't stop raining, oh my gosh, it's been ridiculous. My yard's so high I can't mow it because every night it's rained right before I get home, and it's getting way too high. Hoping to get to it tomorrow night, but we'll see. But other than that, it's been nice, so I can't complain about the warmth, that's for sure. So, all right, well, last week we went through the top 18 ADP-wise wide receivers, and we're going to try and bang through the next 18 so we can get through wide receivers in 2 weeks instead of taking 3. Last week we ended on a bad note with Amari Cooper. The whole idea in this show, for those of you who are kind of new to the event, right now, obviously, everything we talk about here is consistency and its importance in fantasy football. We have been going through the positions, looking at the kind of current ADPs, which we know will change, but I think they're, from what I've seen from most of these, and I think you agree, Ron, that they're, at least reasonable. There's nobody too out of whack, even though we certainly have some guys, that have been, suspended like Ingram, and I'm sure he'll drop it. But wide receiver-wise, I think, there's some interesting ones. There's some that we believe are a little high, a little low. But I think we've been breaking it down, and we'll continue to do that this week. We're kind of looking at their ADPs, kind of looking at that as it's compared to the consistency tier draft list that will be showing up in the 2018 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, which will be out June 1st, so you can make sure you get that, and we'll talk obviously a lot more about it once we get closer to that date. But we're kind of comparing those against where I have them ranked from a consistency standpoint, fantasy football standpoint, and how close are they matching up, or how far away are they, whether they're undervalued or overvalued. So last week, like I said, we ended on a bad note named Amari Cooper. Still can't understand. In fact, I was writing the profiles today for wide receivers. I got to Amari Cooper, and I just wrote, here we go again, folks. Another year, another blob of me telling you not to draft Amari Cooper at the current ADP. Last year, I think he was 7 or 8 overall wide receiver. He's at 17, and he's still way too high, based on where they are on a normal basis. So, but that was the bad news this week. We're starting off on the good news this week. We start with wide receiver 18, Demaryius Thomas. I have him 15th in my list. I could argue moving him up. The way I look at it is last year with basically garbage at quarterback. He was 16th in total points, 69%, tied for 14th in consistency. Like I said, I have him ranked 15th, so even if he matches those numbers, that's respectable. But he's got a decent quarterback now in Casey Keenum. I have a feeling he could move back into that top 12, could be a wide receiver 1. I would love to get him as a wide receiver 2 on my team this year. 3 would almost be ridiculous. I don't think he'll fall that far, but wide receiver 2, matching him up with Michael Thomas, Keenan Allen, one of those top guys, that would be fantastic. Ron, what are your thoughts on Demaryius?
No, I like it a lot. Like you said, what he was able to do last year with pretty much garbage at the position, it was pretty impressive, and he's durable. I mean, he's out there every day. He played all 16 games. He was targeted 140 times last year. catch rate just under 60% with 83 grabs. So you like that in a PPR, especially from your wide receiver too. And like I said, all these numbers are all the more impressive considering who he had thrown him the football. And I think too that, we talked a little bit in the quarterback edition about Case Keenum a little bit. He's a guy that I don't necessarily want as my starter, but I definitely, if I'm in a 2 quarterback league, he's a guy I would love to target as my QB2 if I can get him in a nice value. But I think Demaryius, even still with the addition of Case Keenum, I think he's still going to be a little bit undervalued in leagues. I don't know necessarily if people are going to be on him like they used to be, but he's just kind of one of those under the radar, just solid, plug him in and play every week guys. I mean, you go through his career numbers, he's got some really standout years, but he's also got some years where, it's just, you plug him in, you know what you're going to get, and you enjoy the production. And so I think the ranking is fair. But like you said too, I think he could push, outplay his value a little bit and push into maybe that top 12, top 10 vicinity there, especially with a little bit better quarterback play.
Right, especially, we talked last week about guys like T.Y. Hilton and, Devontae Adams and some of these guys who right now ADP-wise are sitting around the wide receiver 1 world. We feel they probably won't reach that, so I could easily see Demaryius replacing them up there, so couldn't agree more with that. We moved down to a guy who, again, kind of going back a couple years when he played for the Bears. Again, this guy was a wide receiver 1. Alshon Jeffery, who is now in Philadelphia, is still a very good wide receiver, and I certainly don't have a problem with him, Carson Wentz or, Nick Foles playing quarterback there. But it just seemed to me like last year, and I remember kind of mentioning this in the magazine last year, was there were just so many mouths to feed with Nelson Aguilar and Zach Ertz, and they had, there was a Torrey Smith, I think, last year as well. There was just so many people there that, he put up decent numbers, and you look at it and you go, okay, well, he's ranked 22nd in total points, 63% consistent, which is respectable. Ranks 28th, though. Here he's ranked 19th. I have him ranked at 20. So I have him, let's say, at the ADP value, but consistency numbers don't say he's worth being drafted that high. He's really more of a wide receiver 3. I don't think he's going to fall that far. So in my mind, he's a little overvalued for me, I guess. Even though I do have him 20th, I guess it's not far off. But again, if it's coming to that point, it's Demaryius versus Alshon. I'm pretty sure I'm going Demaryius. After that, then we'll have to see where Alshon will fall in the draft. But it has him at pick 42, so you're looking at middle of the 4th round. Again, if I can get him as my wide receiver 3, I'm a lot happier. Would you reach for him as a wide receiver 2, or do you think you would want to wait and hope that you can get him at a 3, and if you don't, well, you'll find somebody else that can be just as consistent? Because there's a lot more consistent players in this list after him.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He's definitely not a target of mine, and he'd have to be that wide receiver 3 value for me to get him. I look kind of like I was going to say with Demaryius Thomas. There's a couple guys, well, quite a few guys actually on that list ahead of him that I would bump him above because I feel like he's more of a sure thing as my wide receiver 2. Alshon Jeffery, I'm moving the other way because a couple of guys we're going to talk about as we move further down this list, I feel a little bit more comfortable having them above him. And not to say that he's a bad player. It's just if he's not scoring touchdowns, I don't want to say there's not a lot to his game, but there's really not a whole lot left, especially the last few years. I mean, I know he had the couple of years in Chicago where he's over 1,000 yards. He had double-digit touchdowns in 2014, and he's had injuries in the past too, so that's something you got to look out for as well. But he did play in all 16 games last year. But at PPR standpoint, he only had 57 grabs, only 789 yards. So in a standard league, he might be a guy I might reach for a little bit higher with that wide receiver too, but he's still, even in a standard format with the 9 touchdowns last season, he's still at the bottom of that wide receiver 2 tier for me. But like I said, when we move down in this list, I can count at least probably 4 or 5 guys down this list that I would much rather take a shot on as a wide receiver 2, especially in a PPR format.
Right. I mean, I was looking to see if he missed all 3 games at the end of the year when Wentz went down, just to kind of give me a better feel for where he fell out at. No, well, in the last two, but last one I think they were already locked in anyway. So he only earned one out of the last two or last three, clutch-wise. But, like you said, I just feel like, they have a lot of weapons there. They like to spread the ball around. I don't think they're a one-player team. I mean, Ertz certainly does well, but he's also not your typical tight end either. Like I said, I think it's fair, but I think if there's better options for me to pick, I'll probably move on and pick. So
well, and kind of looking at you mentioned his last three games. I brought up his game logs here, and one of the things that kind of concerns me with him, especially in a PPR, is he's got these games where he's got double-digit targets and he's only hauling in 4 out of 10 or 4 5 out of 11 or he's 7 out of 13. To me, I want a guy that's hauling in more of the targets that he's getting. So that's kind of an issue for me as well. Just the like the 2 out of 8 targets. Week 8 against the Niners there, and you got to look at some of these too. A couple of these games were blowouts as well, so I get that. But I don't know. He's just kind of a guy I'm indifferent on. I'm not targeting him, but if the value gets crazy good, once again, there's very few guys I'm not taking if the value's there. But he's one of them. I'm just kind of like, eh.
Yeah, definitely. Another guy that's kind of one of those guys you just kind of, I'm sure there's going to be arguments of people are going to put him in close to a wide receiver 1, and I'm sure there's going to be people that might say, oh, he's just going to be another number in that offensive juggernaut in L.A., and that is Brandon Cooks. He's sitting here, or no, wait a minute, I missed one. Oh, my bad. Wow, I went 2 ahead. My bad.
Yeah,
all right. Okay. You're probably thinking, what PEDs are you on? All right, so no, at number 20, ADP-wise, this is Jarvis Landry.
I was thinking you actually need some.
Yeah, I think I do. At least for some brain food or something. So at wide receiver 20 is Jarvis Landry. We all know my love for Jarvis Landry the last 3 years in Miami. Every year he's, sits around this spot, wide receiver 15 to 20. Even though he was putting up 85% consistency every year in Miami. He goes to the Cleveland Browns, which I know to most people would seem like it would be, almost immediate death. But they did put together a decent offense in this offseason. He has Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. He's got Josh Gordon on the other side. Decent running backs now in the backfield. A good offensive line. The Cleveland Browns could put up a decent offense. So the question comes, really down to, can Jarvis Landry put up the same numbers in Cleveland? I'm going to say no, but I'm going to say his consistency is still going to be at least 70%, maybe even 75%. Again, now he was in the 80, 85 range. He used to be 14 to 16, 15 to 16. I think he can still get into that 12 to 16, 11 to 16, which is your 69 to 75% range. I don't see a reason why not. He's going to be the slot receiver, basically. He'll be the guy I think Tyrod Taylor is going to lean on, especially for those third down catches. And, he's going to be the same guy to Tyrod Taylor that he was for Ryan Tannehill. So I can see him continuing to get the targets. Josh Gordon is going to, make sure that nobody double teams Landry because he's going to obviously get the respect with his speed. You're going to have Duke Johnson possibly coming out of the backfield. Njoku at tight end. I think he has the ability to be up there higher than wide receiver 20. Again, I don't think he's going to hit the 94% he hit last year or be fourth in total points. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised if he ends up around 14th, 15th and gets 70%, 75% like Doug Baldwin did. If Doug Baldwin can do it, why can't Jarvis Landry do it in Cleveland? Thoughts? Agree?
Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a drop, but 112 catches last season, and 161 targets. I don't think he's going to be far off at least the target number that he posted last year. You might see the catches go down a little bit. I will say that I have a lot more confidence in Tyrod Taylor at quarterback than I do Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill is so streaky to me, and
Right.
the thing about it is too, like you talked about the offense, it could hurt his chances a little bit because they got a lot of mouths to feed in the backfield as well,
Right.
and so I think they're going to look to get those guys the ball, and that could take away a few of those targets, and so it could be a little less than that, but I don't think he's really going to be far off of those target and reception numbers last
Right.
year. It's just a matter of can Josh Gordon keep his nose clean? Can
Right.
they stay injury free? And as long as Taylor's at quarterback, I think he makes for a good pick here. But he's one of these guys too, that I mentioned last time. We were talking about who was it? Just a minute ago, I lost the name here. Our boy Alshon Jeffery here.
Yeah.
I would take Jarvis Landry all day long over Alshon Jeffery, and I would have no problem having him as my wide receiver too, even though he is in Cleveland.
Right. And a lot of things I think we also talked about a little bit. I was thinking, I knew we had talked about this in last week or week before or whatever it was, but, Jarvis Landry put up those numbers last year with Jay Cutler at quarterback.
Yeah.
So we got to believe that Tyrod can be obviously much better. It's going to be an offensive scheme, and I realize that, but they didn't bring Jarvis Landry in for not to use him. And if he can be the other side of Josh Gordon and make them both dangerous, I just feel like it's just going to be, it's going to be a good time for all that draft him. And again, if he drops to 20, I don't know if he's fallen more than that. I was going to look at some of these other drafts I've been involved with and where he went. I'm looking.
Well, and while you're doing that, not to say
Landry went in the
I don't
fourth
think,
round. Yeah.
Okay. And not to say that I don't think that Baker Mayfield can be a solid NFL quarterback, but I got a lot more, at least this season anyway. If Baker Mayfield ends up winning the starting job, that kind of makes my confidence in Jarvis Landry waver a little bit.
Right. Yeah, this guy took Ezekiel Elliott, Mike Evans, and then in round 4 took Jarvis Landry. That's a pretty good trio right there.
Yeah, that's a nice start. I like it.
Yeah. Okay, so we move on to, again, kind of going back to a guy that we might both kind of go, I'm not sure I'm feeling it, and that's Allen Robinson. He's at wide receiver 21. Yes, a few years ago he was a stud in Jacksonville, but he kind of fell off, last year. Certainly didn't put up anywhere near the numbers that he has in the past. Now he's going to Chicago. Not necessarily known for their passing game. They have a second-year quarterback in Mitch Trubisky, who I still don't think is very good. I really don't see me drafting Allen Robinson for any reason at any spot in any round. Do you?
It's going to have to be. It's going to. I'm not to say that I don't like him, because I'm a little higher on Mitch Trubisky than you are. Not to say that I'm ready to hand him an MVP award anytime soon, but I think there's a little bit more potential there than you might think there is. But at the same time, it's still his second year in the league, and it's very rare that we see a guy really come on in that second year. One of the things that I think about too with Allen Robinson is maybe the production in a PPR might be there towards the beginning of the year, but when you get a little bit later on in the season, he's playing in Chicago. When you get into November, December in Chicago, late October even, the weather's not real favorable there, and I think that can affect not only having a young quarterback, but also the wide receivers he's throwing to. And so I got to look at that a little bit also, and I'd have to look at the schedule and just kind of see how many games that they have at home, how many games they have at Green Bay when the temperatures are going to be close to 0. That gives me a little bit of pause in addition to the pause I already had with him. So, like you said too, a few years ago, he's a top guy, and then last year, the injury, he's coming off that too. So, not to say that I don't think he can be productive. The other thing I was shocked with Allen Robinson too is how young he is. He's only 24 years old as well.
Okay.
And so, yeah, exactly. So, he's fourth year in the league, going to be his fifth year coming up, and so he's still got a lot of good football ahead of him. But it's one of those things that I kind of lump him in there with Alshon Jeffery. I feel much more comfortable with him as my wide receiver 3 if I'm able to get him there, but I don't know if he's going to last that long.
Yeah, I suppose it's going to be based on the drafts and how that all comes about, but we'll have to wait and see, if the ADP falls or not. like you said, I don't see me draft him as a wide receiver 2. Not with the other choices that we'll get to later in some of these guys. So
yeah, I mean, once again, like we said with Jeffery, still there's a couple guys that come behind him that I'd feel much more comfortable taking.
Right. So another guy that changed teams this year for the third time in the last 4 years, Brandon Cooks. So he left New Orleans after he had a nice 75% consistency. He went to New England, and everybody and their mother was putting him in the top 12, said he was going to be a stud, blah, 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 blah. But we all know, any of us that follow fantasy football or real football, that the Patriots don't like to really put anybody in the spotlight other than Tom Brady. Brandon Cooks had a very nice year, ranked 15th in total points, but only 63% consistency, going back to the Patriots way. You don't get the ball every game. There might be games you get 1 or 2 catches, then you might get 10. That's just the way they flow because that's how they win football games. So his consistency was 26th ranked overall, which puts him as a wide receiver 3. But, I think we both agree that I think wide receiver 22 is a fair spot. I would have no problem making him my, wide receiver 2. I still feel that he'll probably match these numbers in LA. I think he'll have some big games and put up some decent points. But I also think there'll be games that, Gurley will take over and control the game. And they also have a very good defense. So, I just don't see them needing to throw the ball a lot in that offense. And I just feel like Cooks is just going to be solid, but not much more than where I think he is now. I definitely won't draft him. I'd rather have him as my wide receiver 3, but I don't think there's a chance in this world he'll fall that far. But I think he's, I think he's fair at 22, but I don't think I would reach for him, any higher than that.
And he's, when you draft baseball, you draft anything. There's these guys that it just seems like their name is, ranked higher in kind of the public perception than it is when we see on these lists. And it seems to me like Cooks is one of those guys that he's on everybody's short list of people they want to get. And I think he's going to be, like you said, a big target as your wide receiver 2. And I'd love to have him as my wide receiver 3. I would feel very good about that. Yeah. And I think the numbers he put up in 2017, like you said, when you look at the overall body of work, it looks pretty impressive. But from a consistency standpoint, you'd like to have a little bit more out of your wide receiver too. And I think his 2017 numbers are kind of what I would expect him to have. You mentioned Todd Gurley in a running game, but also too, you got Robert Woods there, you got Cooper Kupp there, you got a couple other guys that could steal a little bit of his thunder. So I don't think it's so much of a revolving door as the Patriots have, but you still got other mouths to feed there too. But once again, if you can hand the ball to Todd Gurley and blow people off the ball and control game flow and everything that they were able to do last year, why would you put the ball in the air if you don't have to? And that defense, they're not going to be playing from behind a whole hell of a lot with that defense. That defense is scary. So, that could hurt him a little bit as well because, when you think about the Patriots last season, they started the year allowing, I think, first 3-4 weeks, it was an average of like 320 passing yards a game. So they were putting the ball in the air. So even though they're spreading it around a little bit, those chances were there. I don't know how many chances there's going to be from that standpoint either. So I think his 2017 numbers are going to maybe kind of be his ceiling as far as production you can expect. Right.
I mean, like you said, I think if he can hit those numbers, it's solid. It's a wide receiver. It's a high wide receiver 2, low wide receiver 3. I have a feeling his ADP is going to go up. I would easily see him being top 15 ADP wise as we get closer to the season, because I think people are going to look at the draft and they're going to look in that range of guys that are ranked 17th to 22nd like that, and they're going to go, wow, Brandon Cooks, whoa, sweet, yeah, he's awesome. Now people will also jump on Demaryius Thomas, but the other guys with Landry moving teams and Jeffries and Robinson, I have a feeling Cooks moves up to closer to 15, at least ADP wise, as we get close to the season, just because of the name and what he is as a talent. But I hope I think people are going to miss out the fact that he's a great player, but in a system that's really more run related and more defensive related than a team like New Orleans that he was in and flourishing in.
Let me ask you this before we move on. Would you rather have Brandon Cooks or Alshon Jeffrey?
Oh, I would definitely take Brandon Cooks for that.
Okay.
Like you said, Demaryius, no. Landry, probably not. I'd still take Landry. But Robinson or Jeffery, yeah. If I didn't have the guy after this, or a couple more down, or a few more down, but I think I definitely would take Cooks over Jeffery and Robinson. That's for sure at this point.
I agree.
So.
I agree.
All right, so we're gonna move into number 23 here. Golden Tate. Every year, he's kind of like the Jarvis Landry, almost as bad. He puts up some nice consistent numbers, and he gets no love whatsoever. Last year, he was number 12. Yep, that's what you heard. Number 12 overall in fantasy total points. His consistency was not as great, actually. It was 63%, which is down. He's usually in the 70% range. But still, I kind of write that off to the fact that Marvin Jones was more consistent than he was, and Marvin Jones is actually 3 more down from him ADP-wise. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but he's 25th in consistency. He's ranked here at 23rd. He is certainly a very good wide receiver to have. I think his consistency will stay at that 65%, maybe go back into the 70% range. Their running game is still kind of marginal. They've got a new rookie in Kerryon Johnson. They added LeGarrette Blount. It's still going to be there, but it's not going to be, they're not going to be running the ball. And their defense usually doesn't stop too many people, so they'll probably be throwing the ball a lot. I remember last year watching the Browns put up 35 points on them or something, and they beat them 38-35. So if the Browns can do that with Kaiser, imagine what the rest of this league can do. So I have a feeling he's going to continue to put up the numbers, be consistent. Like I said, we'll get to Marvin Jones, and we'll talk about how much I think I would love him to have him as wide receiver too if I don't get Tate. And in the drafts that I've seen, Tate is going, in that realm. Again, I think Detroit's offense will continue to do well this year, and I think both Tate and Jones will benefit from it.
Yeah, when you look at his stats too, there's a lot to like. And he's a very under the radar, low key kind of guy, especially in a PPR. I didn't realize until just now, when I was looking up his logs, 4 straight seasons of 90 plus catches, which is crazy to me. I never would have pegged him for that. 76% catch rate from last year, so he's hauling in the passes that Stafford's throwing, and it seems like too, him and Marvin Jones both are kind of benefiting from the continued improvement of Stafford. We sang his praises in the QB show, just how consistent he was in our rankings. I mean, he was right there towards the top, and once again, kind of another under the radar guy. And so you mentioned the running game too, and when I look at the running game, it's just a lot of guys. There's not like one home run hitter there. You got Theo Riddick as the pass catching back, so I don't look for that to eat into a lot of the production either. So I think it's still for both of these guys, Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, still going to be productive 2018 seasons coming up.
Yeah, Golden Tate the last 3 years has 30 clutch games combined, and he's played all 16 games every year. So he's averaging 10 of 16, 63% almost every year. 1 year he had 9, 1 year he had 11, but basically, he's right there. He's always in the top 20 in points. Consistency-wise, he's just right there, and hopefully he continues to fly under the radar and falls out that way. But him and Marvin Jones, I think, will be great ads this year. I'm sure I'll see him on a lot of my teams. All right, at number 24, J2S2, our favorite square roots here. Juju Smith-Schuster comes in at 24. Last year, just kind of really broke out. End of the year, 21st in total points, 9 out of 14, 64% consistency, which just happened to match up with 22nd rank. So it being ranked at 24th certainly is a good spot. I was a little worried a month ago because I was worried that the Steelers were going to keep Martavius Bryant and they were going to give him another chance. And that was some of the stuff I was reading, is that, they were going to give Martavius Bryant another chance and blah, 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 and, give him a, he's a changed man and all this stuff, and then, bam, they traded him away to Oakland. So in my mind, Smith-Schuster is certainly right there, certainly has the ability to put up some very good numbers. Again, kind of like some of these other guys, I'd rather pick him as my wide receiver 3. I have him listed at 23, so I have him in pretty much the same spot. I would hope he would fall a little bit farther. He may not, just because of the name recognition and the breakout year he had in his rookie year, which is obviously very good. So, I certainly have no problem with where he's at. Getting him in as my wide receiver 3 would be better. I don't know if I would reach for him for a wide receiver 2 unless I was loaded at all the other positions. Like I loaded up on running backs, tight ends and quarterbacks, and now I'm in round 6 or 7, and I'm getting him as my wide receiver 2. Well, then I guess it makes more sense. But they have him at pick 50, which overall pick 50, wide receiver 24. So we'll see. It's good value. He certainly put up the numbers to prove it. Sophomore slump, I don't know. There's, as long as Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell are there, who's going to get most of the fantasy points. But he certainly is that guy that, when the defenses double team Antonio or try to stop him, Schuster's going to get open and catch those long touchdowns. So what are your thoughts?
I think he's okay where he's at. I'm not opposed to him if I could, kind of like you said, if I'm waiting a little while on my wide receiver 2, I'm okay with him slotting him in that spot. Like you said, the guy lining up opposite on the other side of the field is pretty good, so he's going to draw a lot of the attention. And not to say that SmithSchuster is going to fly under the radar, because I think we all kind of saw, what he was capable of, especially as a rookie. And I'm not really in fear of a sophomore slump. I think maybe it'll help him a little bit as far as knowing that he doesn't have to worry about Martavis Bryant being there and eating into his production and them wanting to get him on the field. So I'm okay with him right here at 24, because as I'm kind of looking through this ADP list here, we're getting to a point where I'm kind of running out of guys that are at the bottom of this list that I really feel comfortable taking over some of these, guys that are kind of sandwiched here in these 20 to 20 ADP 20 to 24 as far as our receivers here. And there's not a lot of guys behind him that I would rather have, kind of in their situations. I can count maybe 1 or 2 that I might take over Schuster, but overall I kind of like him here. I think it's a pretty fair value here at wide receiver 24.
Okay, fair enough. At number 25 is Michael Crabtree. Crabtree last 3 seasons has been 69, 69, 64% consistent. Last year was a down year. He missed a couple games. The Raiders offense was a mess. He also got in a fight and got suspended. So let's just say he was a hot mess and still was 23rd ranked in consistency at 64%. He's going to Baltimore. He gets to be in the spotlight. He gets to be the man because he's the only receiver that's anywhere semi-decent in that team at this point. I have to believe he stays in that 65 to 70% consistency. You got to believe Flacco's going to throw him the ball a lot. They have some other weapons. I think John Brown and Willie Snead are there, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, we got a burner in John Brown to kind of keep, defensive, keep kind of stretch the field a little bit. I think Crabtree is that, possession, good receiver that Flacco can count on. And I can see him, catching the same number of balls and putting up the consistency numbers that he put up, 15 and 16. I'm not sure he'll be top 12 in total points, but I could see him being top 15-ish. And, sitting here at wide receiver 25, now this is a guy that I'd have no problem. And I'll be honest with you, if I had to choose between Schuster and Crabtree as my number 2, or as my, if I had to choose between the two, I would probably take Crabtree because he's done it so many times.
I agree. Yeah, I see that. I'm going to go opposite, though. I'm going to take the upside in Schuster and see what he can put up. And not to say that I'd be disappointed if I got Michael Crabtree, especially PPR format. I think that's where I'm targeting him more, kind of for all the reasons that you said. With the guys that they have there that can stretch the field a little bit. Like you said with Snead and John Brown, those guys are some burners down the field. I think he is going to be that possession guy because when you look at their tight ends as well, they have just a ton of guys. They drafted 2 more. They spent a first-round pick on a tight end and a third-round pick on a tight end, already behind a couple of guys they have there. Max Williams was a second-round pick, and so, they don't have a lot to work with there that's real consistent anyway. So I think Mike Crabtree can kind of maybe take that more consistent possession, kind of move the chains type of player. So PPR, I'm okay with him, but still I'd like to target him as kind of that wide receiver 3. If I can get him as that wide receiver 3, I'm sitting pretty with that. But I'd still take SmithSchuster over him just because of the upside.
Gotcha. So now we move to number 26, and this is Marvin Jones. We talked quite a bit about him with Golden Tate at 20, a wide receiver 23. So now we're in the wide receiver 3 range, and Marvin Jones last year just because Golden Tate was 12th in total points doesn't mean Marvin Jones couldn't beat him and go 11th in total points. To me, that was just dumbfounding. I mean, Golden Tate, I'm used to being that good, being that consistent. So a little bit of a jump up like that was not a big surprise. I know it was to you, but I've seen his consistency and I've seen his decent numbers. But Marvin Jones, the year before was 53% consistent, 42nd in total points, ranked 38th. But he had a terrible second half in 2016. In fact, 2016 he had 5 straight clutch games, 6 out of his first 7, and then he got hurt, and he only had 2 more the rest of the year, so he only had 8. So he looked terrible, and the reason I know that is I'm reading out of the book from last year because I haven't changed his profile, and I was like, why did I remember loving Marvin Jones going into last year in 2017, and I couldn't remember why. Now I remember he started off 16 on fire, got hurt, and then kind of had a poor ranking in the end of the year and didn't get a lot of love. So I had him on a lot of my teams, as well as Tate. I think I drafted Jones as like my wide receiver 4 or 5 in most leagues. So he really came through for me. I'm really surprised to see his numbers still down, at wide receiver 3 based on both 11th in total points and 14th in consistency. This is a guy I have no problem making my wide receiver 2. If I don't get Tate, I'll take him, and I would probably take Jones over Schuster or Crabtree if it came down to that, because I just feel like that offense and the way he's worked well and with Matthew Stafford, I think that's an offense that you can really get into and feel like you got consistency out of.
Yeah, and you mentioned 2016 too. You got to think about the 930 yards he had. He had that big 200-yard game at the beginning of the season, like week 2 or 3, I believe, as well. And so a big chunk of his production came from that in 2016. But I think I would take him over Crabtree, and it's kind of a crapshoot between him and Schuster for me. I wouldn't be opposed to getting either one, but I might give the nod a little bit over Schuster to him, just because of like what you said. I think he's got more of a guaranteed kind of lion's share of the offense. It was a pretty even split as far as the overall numbers for him and Tate last year, and they both produced. And so I think you'll see more of that. Like we talked about with Baltimore, one of the things with the Lions too is they don't really have necessarily a consistent tight end in there, because the guy that they had before wasn't that good anyway, and the Colts signed him because he's awesome and whatnot. And so so but anyway, I think that's you can see more of the same from him. But for me, if I got him or Schuster as my wide receiver 3, I'm okay with that in pretty much any format.
Right. All right, so our next guy, Robert Woods, I think would have been a lot higher on this list, ADP-wise, if the Rams would not have gotten Brandon Cooks in the offseason. He was on fire last year. First 12 games, 67%. Ends the year 18th in consistency, but an injury put him out for the last 4 games. He probably would have finished at least in the top 20, if not top 15 in total points based on the pace he was going at. But, as I said, now they have Brandon Cooks. Even wide receiver 27, I'm kind of like, I don't know. What are they going to do? What is the share going to be between Woods and Cooks? I mean, the Rams aren't going to bring in Cooks to not use him more often than Woods. I mean, let's be honest. So I'm really surprised to see even Woods this high, ADP-wise, at this point. And maybe, like you said, we'll see a change within the next month or so where Woods will drop down into the mid-30s and Cooks will go up into the teens, the mid-teens. I just can't bring myself into believing that he's going to be that consistent this year with Cooks added into this offensive scheme. Do you disagree?
Well, like you said too, they're not going to give up what they gave up to get Cooks into town if they're not planning on getting him the ball. And so, like we talked about, before, it's the same things that scare me, with Woods, that scare me with Cooks. You figure the pecking order is going to be wide receiver 1 Cooks, 2 Woods, 3 Kupp. Well, if you're already scared about Cook's production because of the running game that they have, you definitely got to be scared about it a little bit for Woods. Now, I will say, if you're willing to invest in Woods later on, the risk is going to not be as great as if you invest in Cooks and kind of strike out. So, I'd have to look at him as maybe kind of on the list as kind of a lower tier wide receiver 3. Not necessarily a guy I'm going to target, but he's another one of those guys that if it gets to be, a certain type of value, I might jump on. But I don't think I'm necessarily going into any drafts actively looking to get Robert Woods. He would have to fall a little bit for me to put him on my team.
Yeah, I agree. So we move into somebody who I'm honestly in shock of where he's sitting at wide receiver 28, and that's Julian Edelman. Unless he's still injured and he's not 100% healthy, which I gotta believe he should be by now. But this guy, put up back-to-back 75% consistencies or higher prior to him going down. So I'm reading. It says he should be ready for the start of training camp since he repaired his knee last September. That's given him, basically a full calendar year. Man, I really hope I can get Julian Edelman as my wide receiver 3 in a PPR format. I mean, I have him ranked 17th right after Marvin Jones. Am I missing something, or is it just the fact that everybody forgot Julian Edelman plays for New England because he missed the whole season? That's the only thing I can think of.
It must be, and maybe his people look at the age, they look at all the mileage on him a little bit in that regard. I don't really know what it is, but like you said, wide receiver 3, that's like getting an early Christmas present. But even wide receiver 2 in a PPR, if he's ready for week 1 and he's got Tom Brady throwing to him, and we know the relationship he has with Tom Brady, I'll take him as my wide receiver 2 in a PPR all day as well.
Yeah, it's just like...
2016, 98 grabs, 2014, 92, 105 in 2013, all working with Tom Brady. I'll gladly take that production as my wide receiver 2 all day long. If I can get him as my wide receiver 3, holy cow, that's amazing in a PPR.
Yeah, I'm looking at the draft that they did on Sirius Radio. Now, I know we talked about the fact that this was a best ball draft, but Julian Edelman was taken at the beginning of the 5th round. I'll guarantee you he was not wide receiver 28. So that's not going to last long. I mean, he surprisingly... Well, no, I take that back. I take that back. He did. So surprisingly, he was picked after Allen Robinson, Jeffery, Gordon, and Golden Tate before Marvin Jones. But again, I'm looking at this, trying to count real quick. He was probably picked around wide receiver 18, 17, 18. That makes more sense to me. He wasn't after Woods. He wasn't after, these guys. So I have a feeling that's just a number that's a little bit off because maybe it's early in the year and people kind of forgot that Julian Edelman will be back 100% this year. I have a feeling Edelman will be up in the mid-teens before too long.
Well, and it might be one of those things too. People, like you said, we have forgotten about him, but once they, we get camps going and they see him back on TV. Oh yeah, Julian Edelman's pretty good, and he plays with Tom Brady, who's pretty good also. Right. So, but when I'm looking at this list, I wouldn't. The guys ahead of him, the only one where we have Edelman sitting at wide receiver 28. As I go up this list, the only one between 28 and probably Demaryius Thomas that I would take above Edelman is maybe Jarvis Landry. Other than that, pretty much every guy in between there, I'm taking Edelman over them all day.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would take Edelman over Landry. I don't know if I would take Edelman over. Well,
but that's the first one I got to where I'm kind of like, who do I take?
Yeah, but Demaryius, I think I would take Demaryius. But even that's close. That's close.
Well, I mean, you look above Demaryius, you got Amari Cooper sitting there at 17. I'd rather have Julian Edelman all day long. Amari Cooper too. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's why I said I have Julian at 17, and I wouldn't be surprised if I move him up a little bit more, before the season starts, because if somebody like a Devontae Adams may move farther down, or or somebody like that. But I like you said, I'd be giddy to get him as even my wide receiver 2, especially in the 5th round, because, I mean, that guy, he had Gurley, Mixon, Diggs, Tate, and Edelman. So not a bad five start there.
No, not at all.
I don't like Mixon, but that's my opinion. So, okay, as we move on, and I gotta scroll back up. As we move on, and now we hit one of our probably favorite wide receivers, and with lots of sarcasm attached, and that's Sammy Watkins. We just love Sammy because we just love passing on him every time he comes up in any draft that we're ever in. He is at wide receiver 29. He now plays, for those of you who lost track of him in the offseason because you didn't care any less than I did. He went to Kansas City, and so now he'll be there opposite of Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, which may help him, may not. I still have no belief whatsoever that I'm going to draft him at all. Maybe if he was wide receiver 4 and somebody made me a bet that I wouldn't draft him, I'd do it. But beyond that, I probably will just move on and get one of these other guys, that we loved more either before or after him.
Well, the thing about Sammy Watkins, I root for him a little bit because he's a hometown kid here. He's a Fort Myers kid, went to high school here.
That's right. I forgot about
that's
that.
Cool about him, But yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. The other thing I like that I can do with Sammy Watkins is, for those of you that are old enough to remember classic Coming to America, every time I can refer to him as Sammy Watkins. And so that's pretty good. But other than that, yeah, I'm not targeting him in a lot of places. He's got to be an insane value. He's a decent best ball guy because he does stretch the field and he can catch some touchdowns. He did have 8 last year, but overall, he's just not a guy that there's a lot there to get excited about. He's just another. He is a nice weapon for Kansas City, and I think he fills a role there. But as far as a fantasy player, I think he's a better real life player. Just kind of fulfilling that role. 3 for 39 and a touchdown, or 1 for 75 and a touchdown isn't going to help you all that much, and it definitely doesn't feed into what we do here with our consistency model.
27, 28, 29. So he was the 29th wide receiver picked in the Sirius XM draft. Believe it or not, Edelman was 23rd. I was surprised. Okay. After I started counting all the wide receivers, I'm like, he was farther down there than I thought he'd be. But yeah, so Watkins was right after Crabtree at 29 before Pierre Garcon. So again, I just don't see it happening for me. But like I said, he might have some value there with those kind of weapons. I mean, he certainly didn't have a lot of weapons around him in Buffalo. Certainly didn't have a ton of weapons around him for the Rams. And he had some decent games. And I mean, he did have 5 clutch games last year. He had 8. So he was 8 at 15. 53%, which doesn't sound bad, but it's 40th overall rank. And he's wide receiver 29, so he's still a little bit overvalued from that standpoint. You might see the ball a little bit more. A lot of that's going to depend on Patrick Mahomes and how he gets comfortable with the offense and throwing the ball around that much. Tyreek Hill certainly will warrant a double team, and Watkins will probably, like you said, he'll have his games where he might have a big game or two, and just because they're focusing on stopping Kelce and Hill, but there's just so many weapons there with Hunt in the background.
Well, and the other thing he's got going for him too is the quarterback. They're going to be starting Patrick Mahomes. We know if there's one thing he can do, the guy's got a hand cannon, so he can definitely air it out a little bit, and that's what Watkins tends to be able to do really well. So he's got that going for him. Right.
No, definitely. All right, so we move on to wide receiver 30, and that is Pierre Garcon in San Francisco. Garcon actually was having a really nice year last year, starting off 5 for 8, 63%, which would have ranked him 29th, which isn't bad, and he's wide receiver 30. The probably more interesting thing about his numbers, though, was he did it without Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. So he was 63% consistent with what other the garbage they had there, C.J. Beathard or somebody. I kind of have him as my sneaky wide receiver 4, hopefully draft guy, because he's going to be playing with Garoppolo for a full season. Yeah, I know that Marquise Goodwin is there, and he certainly will get his share, but his wide receiver number is 41. But I really like Garcon as a sneaky pick coming into the year. I really was hoping he wouldn't be this high, that I could get him as a wide receiver 4. He seemed to go right after Watkins, so obviously he's not far behind, at least in most experts' eyes. But I kind of like him going into this year. He's an aging veteran, but he certainly still plays, well. This late in his career, he's certainly still got some speed. Goodwin's got speed, so I got to believe that he can put up some decent numbers in this offense, and be that veteran wide receiver that Garoppolo can count on.
Yeah, I agree. I look for him. I don't know if we can expect the same kind of production that Garoppolo put together at the end of last season, but I really also, on the other hand, don't really see a whole lot maybe preventing him from doing that, especially if he gets Garcon back. So I like both of those guys as well. You mentioned another guy, too, that I'm targeting a little bit later in drafts, and that's Marquise Goodwin, because he's another sneaky guy that had a really quietly nice season last year there in San Francisco. Flew under the radar most of the year. So, in 8 games last year, Garcon had 40 grabs. That's an average of 5 per game. So PPR, you got to like him. But he's posted some solid seasons throughout the years. He's not that big 1,000-yard, 100-catch, flashy guy. He did have one of those seasons, to his credit, in Washington. But, 68, 72, 79 catches. PPR, you'll take that all day long. He's got a few seasons where he scored 5 or 6 touchdowns. So definitely as a wide receiver 4, you can't argue with that production from that spot if you can get him there at that point.
Exactly. So we move on to a guy that I want to like him. His numbers tell me I want to like him because he's right there with some of the other names that we did like, and that is our good friend Devin Bunches of Funches in Carolina. End of the season ranked 20th in total points, so wide receiver 2. 63% consistent, played all 16 games, 27th in consistency, which puts him in the wide receiver 3 range. So, sitting here at number 31, you kind of have to go, wow, the numbers say he should be drafted higher than he is, so he's really kind of undervalued. I know we're not big fans of, Colby's favorite quarterback, Cam Newton, but he does obviously seem to love Funches. What I think scares me more than anything is that there's really nothing else in that wide receiver core that, could scare somebody to not double team Funches. I know Greg Olsen will always be there, so he certainly will take some of that pressure off. But do you think Funches can return, at least, even if he matches these levels? This is a great value to get him at wide receiver 31, pick 73, so he's in the, basically 7th round here. Do you think he can match those?
I think so. One of the things you mentioned, Greg Olsen, and as much as I've enjoyed some nice seasons drafting Greg Olsen, and he's been, a consistent tight end, and he's been in the lineup day in and day out. He was coming off a big injury last year. It looked like he lost a step a little bit, so I don't know. Maybe he has a whole offseason to recover. Maybe he'll kind of get back to form. But it scares me a little bit when you have a guy like that, too, that was kind of contemplating retirement at one point in the offseason as well. They bring in Torrey Smith, which I don't know why anybody would give Torrey Smith money to do anything. And so I think just by default, he's going to be the guy there. I mean, he was targeted 111 times last year in the Carolina offense. And, we talk about Cam Newton quite a bit as we don't want to draft him. We don't want to have him anywhere. I would much rather have Devin Funches than Cam Newton, and I think where he's at in this ADP, I think that's about where I would put him at. I wouldn't be all that opposed if I can get him as a wide receiver, maybe wide receiver 4. I don't know necessarily if I feel real comfortable with him as my 3, but I think you could do a lot worse there as your wide receiver 4.
Got it. Yeah, no, I like you said, I think the value is definitely there. I was actually more surprised. I guess I kind of forgot about that he had a decent season. So the fact that he's sitting at 31, I have him at... Do I have him at? Oh, I have him at 27. So obviously I gave him a little more love, which, again, numbers say he should be there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, real quick, from a volume standpoint, too, 111 targets. I mean, that right there, exactly. He's going to get some opportunities. So
Right. The next guy, I'm going to make this short and sweet. Do you have any reason to believe that this guy can after a horrendous rookie season can be worth being a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football in 2018, and that is Corey Davis from Tennessee.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes. And the reason I say yes is I watched him, a lot of his woes last year could be chalked up to injury. And I know he didn't put up flashy numbers. I know he didn't put up big games. But when I got to watch him play a couple times, I was impressed with what I saw from him as far as just being a guy that he seemed to run decent routes. I'm trying to bring up his stats here. I know that there's not a whole lot to look at in that regard.
Clutch games, 2 of 11, 85th in total points because he only played in 11 games. But just
right,
there's just nothing there. Normally with a guy like this, if he stretches 3 games together and at the end of the year, I feel like okay, maybe there's something there. But he had 2 clutch games. One was in week 1 and one was in week 16. I just don't see. I mean, you watched him, and that's why I'm asking you, because I obviously didn't watch him, but I just don't see anything that says, yeah, this guy should be worth taking a chance at as my wide receiver 3, especially with all the other choices that we've been talking about that we could pick ahead. Now, I have him ranked as the 45th, and I even thought that was too high. But when you look at the guys around him, you go, okay, well, I guess, yeah, sure. But like you said, if that's what you feel, I know, I'm with you, man. You sometimes you can pick guys like that. You don't see much out of them, but it was just a bad year, and they put it all together, and him and Mariota start clicking, and it'll be what it is. But man, you got to remember, to get into the wide receiver 3 range, you have to be over 60% consistent. That's why I said I don't know if I can take that chance that he's going to be that consistent after last year. Can he be 50%, 40%? Yeah, that would certainly be a big upgrade. I just don't know if I can say that he can be 60% and get into that top, 36 spot.
Yeah. I don't think it's I don't think it's completely out of the question. I know it's kind of a stretch, but like I said, I was impressed with what I saw of him. I like the fact that he's a big-bodied guy. You got to think of the division he's playing into. He's going to get to play the Colts twice, who are terrible. It kind of remains to be seen what Colby's Texans are going to be, especially in the secondary. I know they brought in the Honey Badger, so we'll see how that works. But I think Mariota can take a step forward, and he's a guy that I just like I said, I believe it was that the game that I watched was the one where he went 6 for 91 against the Rams. And he looks solid there, but like I said, I think he's got a lot going for him, and I think that if Mariota can kind of get back to his form that we saw a couple seasons ago, I think he's a guy. The wide receiver 3 could be a little bit of a stretch. 60% consistency, maybe that's a stretch as well, but it's a risk that I'm going to take a couple places and just kind of see how it shakes out.
Okay, fair enough. So, Jordy Nelson, one of our favorite guys, favorite consistent wide receivers, always has been. But for some reason, the Packers just didn't want to pay him, much to Aaron Rodgers and mine and a lot of people's dismay. And so now he's went to the hot mess called the Oakland Raiders, where he'll be there with Amari Cooper and now Martavius Bryant. I want to love that he's going to have this great comeback and all's going to be well, and he's going to be right up there in that 70% consistency. Wide receiver 33, I guess I don't have a problem maybe drafting him as my wide receiver 3. I mean, you can take that chance with him because you got to feel like, well, he has a chip on his shoulder and wants to prove something. He certainly has the talent. He can certainly catch the ball. He with Cooper being a dropsy, Martavius Bryant's really just a deep ball threat. You got to believe that Derek Carr should be basically Jordy Nelson, to Derek Carr like he was Jordy Nelson to Aaron Rodgers. I'm okay with wide receiver 3 for him and probably getting around 60-65% consistency. What are your thoughts on Jordy? Do you think he's done, or do you think he's got maybe a decent year left in him?
I mean, it all depends upon what he gets as far as quarterback play. I mean, if he's still in Green Bay, he's still going to be mentioned. I don't know if he's mentioned as a wide receiver 1 anymore, if he's still with Aaron Rodgers, but he's right there at wide receiver 2, no doubt. Right. But I mean, you got to think you're considering a guy here as your wide receiver 3 that very recently was a first-round pick.
Right. Oh,
People,
yeah,
so
exactly.
I mean, I don't think that he's going to fall off the cliff, that suddenly. I think wide receiver 3 is a great spot for him. I don't have a problem taking him there, but it's just, it's not so much him. It's just this, and we talked about this before. This entire, sideshow, freak show of an offense they're going to be putting out on the field. It scares the hell out of me, and so that's what I have more of a concern about than anything else. Not necessarily Jordy. It's just the entire offense around him.
Right. No, I agree.
Including the offensive coaching.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we've got just a few more left to get here. Number 34, Cooper Kupp. I think I'll make this one short and sweet, too. We just talked about Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods and how they were going to get enough touches to be consistent again like they were last year. Kupp last year was 60% consistent, 31st in consistency, 25th in total points. Like we said before, we'd almost have to believe that everybody's going to take a hit here. There's just no way that they can maintain their consistency or their fantasy numbers from the year before, Woods and Kupp, when you add Brandon Cooks into the mix. I don't even see Cooper Kupp being a wide receiver 3. I mean, his consistency last year had him at 31st, which just gets him under the radar, under wide receiver 36 as a wide receiver 3. I don't see how he's going to even come close to matching that this year with all those weapons there. There's no way I'm picking him as a wide receiver 3. I might take him if he's a 4 or 5. PPR league, maybe. We'll see if there's nothing else better, but I just I just don't see it.
Yeah, looking at him as wide receiver 34 on this list, I would probably, considering the guys that are after him, I'd move him closer down to maybe about 38, 39, 40 range, because there's a few guys behind him that I would much rather have. And you hit it on the head too. If we're already concerned about Woods and Cooks, you definitely got to be concerned about Kupp. I will say I'd target him more maybe in a PPR format, maybe, but still as my wide receiver 4. If I'm rolling with him as my 3 in any kind of league, I'm hoping that I really drafted some stellar running backs to kind of pick up the slack there, and I get maybe I kind of catch lightning in a bottle with my 4 or my 5, but you got to worry about that. The guys, especially, like we said, with Woods, you're worried about Cooks. You got to worry about the guys behind him as well. Absolutely.
Alrighty, so next guy on the list, number 35, Chris Hogan. I think this is a little too far down for him. Again, with Danny Amendola gone, and now you're basically running the Patriots with Julian Edelman and Chris Hogan. They did add Jordan Matthews, which I think will take some getting used to for Brady. Brady loves, obviously, Edelman and Hogan. I think this is a little far down for Hogan. I guess I still have no problem with the fact that I would draft him as my wide receiver 3. Would prefer a 4. But, what are your thoughts on him at 35? Is that a good spot, or would you rather get him as a wide receiver 4 and then hope he gets because I think he'll earn the wide receiver 3 value. He always seems to do pretty decent. I mean, last year he only played in 9 games, but he was 6 out of 9, so he was 19th, 67% before he went down for the year. If he's healthy coming back, I have to believe that he's certainly a top 3 guy.
If Edelman's healthy, I knock him down a few pegs because I think it's clear, like we talked about with Edelman, he's clearly Brady's guy. But like you said, they do spread the ball around a little bit, so Hogan will still get his share of catches. He'll still get his share of production. I would maybe bump him down a few spots, but I wouldn't go crazy as far as knocking him down to pecking order. Like I said, there's a couple guys, probably the same guys that I would take over Cooper Kupp. Here in between 35 and 40, I would probably take over Hogan as well. So I'm not upset with him, at this point to where I need to scream and yell about it, but I'd probably move him down a couple spots.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so we come to our 36th wide receiver on the list, and this guy is, again, I think we've already had this conversation maybe somewhere else a couple weeks ago, but it's Emmanuel Sanders in Denver. In the past, Sanders has always been a guy that has been fairly consistent, kind of always flown under the radar. The last year was a really bad year for him. Demaryius Thomas kind of was okay in that offense, but poor Emmanuel Sanders, 42% consistency, ranked 52nd. He did miss 4 games, so I have a feeling that he just kind of sat because of butt hurt and just didn't feel like playing because nobody would throw him the ball. The one thing I love about Sanders and why I think he matches up well with Casey Keenum is, Casey Keenum, and they showed this a lot during the playoffs last year, and you saw in that last play that got him, into the conference finals, when he kind of made, he's one of those guys that makes the pass plays last a little longer by staying active in the pocket. Emmanuel Sanders' biggest years was when he had Peyton Manning in the back, and not necessarily because it was Peyton Manning, of course, but Peyton Manning had a very good job, does a very good job of getting rid of the ball, but also keeping plays alive. Not necessarily that he's super fast, but he just knows where to be in the pocket. Emmanuel Sanders is that kind of guy. Always seems to come back to the quarterback, try to make plays, to help a quarterback out. I think he's going to be the perfect complement for Casey Keenum. And so if I can get him again later, as my wide receiver 4, I think he's going to easily earn, wide receiver 3, if not maybe, you got to remember 3 years ago he was 18th in total points, 23rd in consistency. He can certainly be a wide receiver 2 value, but I'd love to take him as a 4 and get 3 out of him. What are your thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders heading into this year?
Well, as I mentioned, he's one of these guys that I would take definitely above a lot of the guys on this list. And when you look at what Case Keenum, you mentioned what he does under pressure and extends plays. He was one of the top guys under pressure as far as rating last year. He was a top 5 guy, which is kind of hard to believe. But I look at the wide receiver situation that he's heading into Denver with, very similar to the one that he had in Minnesota. He's got a solid guy on both sides. They're just maybe missing the impact tight end that they had there. But I like him a lot, and I think that he's, like we said, I'd take him above a few of these guys that we've talked about in this vicinity. And, he might be a under-the-radar guy where you can get a decent value. I think I'd rather have him than Cooper Kupp. I think I'd rather have him than Chris Hogan.
Right.
I'd probably draft him over Corey Davis. I'd look at him over Funches maybe even. So, I think that they're going to be a little bit of an underrated pass offense going into the year because you saw what Case Keenum did last year. The coaching staff just kind of tried to kill him off every week, and he just wasn't having it. And he was just producing, and the wide receivers produced too. So I don't see any reason that Sanders and Thomas can't both have solid years, much like they had in Minnesota with Case Keenum and Thielen and Diggs on both sides.
Right. All right, so we've come to the end of our 2 weeks. As I sit here and we look from number 1 to number 36, and you're now looking at the wide receivers, we're looking at where some of these guys we would have been okay with drafting as our wide receiver 2s and 3s especially, and maybe even draft them as 4s to get 3 value. I think the first thing that comes to mind to me is that if you're going to miss out after the big, let's say, 10 guys, that, if you can get your 2 really good running backs in the first 2 rounds, I think there is no problem getting some very good, consistent wide receivers in rounds, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that can complement and give you enough consistency out of that to offset your stud running backs if you get like a Gurley and say a LaShawn McCoy at the end of the second round, or a Gurley and a Jordan Howard or Dalvin Cook or Freeman or McCaffrey, one of those guys, and then come back in rounds 3, 4, and 5, 6, and get guys like Demaryius Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Tate, Jones, Crabtree, Edelman, those kind of guys, and fill in that 65-70% consistency to go along with the studs you're getting 80-90 out of in the top first 2 rounds. I think that, to me, is almost the way I'm going to be looking at drafts pretty heavily as I start getting to more and more of these mocks and as we get closer to the season. What are your thoughts overall as you look at the wide receiver group, and what are you thinking from that standpoint?
Well, same deal. And we mentioned this in the running back show, how important the running backs are, and in the XM draft that we kind of referenced a few weeks ago. You saw how heavy the running backs were as far as coming off the board, and so I don't think there's a problem there if you tend to go that route and get a couple of solid guys, because we talked about, you mentioned Demaryius Thomas, you mentioned Landry, you mentioned Tate. There's quite a few guys in that 3, 4, 5, that third, fourth round range that could be 100 catch guys, and in a PPR, that's going to make up for any lack of yardage or any lack of touchdowns they have, and so I think that you can really get some solid value there. And even if we move down a little bit more, there's a couple of guys after Emmanuel Sanders that we'll touch on that I like as far as in a PPR standpoint as well. Kind of just to foreshadow a little bit, I mentioned him earlier. Marquise Goodwin's a guy I might wait on a little bit.
Right.
James
I'm surprised to see
Crowder's
Sterling
there,
Shepard down that far.
Yeah, so there's decent value to have when you scroll down this list. There's some guys.
Rashard Matthews has been consistent in the past.
Yeah, and he's going to have to be the one, I think, until Davis steps up. Right. I like Davis as much. I like Davis. Rashard Matthews is a guy that I've targeted the last couple of years, especially in a PPR. So
right. I mean, we're not we've never been fans of Devontae Parker, but somebody's got to catch a ball in Miami.
Right.
So like I said, Will Fuller. If he could have played a full season, you remember how on fire he was. So, yeah, I just feel like that, there's some good, consistent wide receivers later in the drafts, at least so far ADP-wise, based on what we're looking at now, that, if we want to load up. I mean, I've seen guys take 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds. That's not unheard of if, based on what you can get at wide receiver and tight ends. Again, Kyle Rudolph's going, we'll be doing tight ends next week, but, Kyle Rudolph is, 7th round, ADP right now. So, again, if we can load up on running backs and make sure that you've got that covered, and then just go crazy on wide receivers as Kyle Rudolph and, whoever you get quarterback-wise, Cousins or whatever in rounds 8 and 9, I think we can build a hell of a consistent team that's going to be very competitive in every league you're in. So, all right, well, thanks, Ron, for your time as always, and we plowed through that pretty quickly, a little bit past our hour time frame, but I think well worth it, and hopefully everybody else will feel the same way. So, Ron, tell everybody where you're at, what you're doing, and then we'll do the same and we'll move on.
Catch me on Twitter at the Real Made. You got Fantastics baseball stuff happening. As always, got the Nasty Cast and Fantrax Dynasty Baseball with Manly Van Lee and our boy Nate Dockin. We do that every week. We'll be cranking those out tomorrow night. You can always tell it's one of the things that kind of gets me excited for the season is, we're kind of behind the scenes here, plugging away, putting the finishing touches on the consistency guide to be getting ready, and that always gets me excited for the season as well, because that gives me a chance to really dive into this stuff in addition to doing this every week. So football season's closer than we think, Bob, and that's always a good thing. So
yep, sure is. All right, well, you can find me, of course, at Bob_Lung on Twitter. You can find me at BigGuyFantasySports.com. We are here every week doing the Fantasy Football Consistency Show, and we thank everybody for listening and following along. Next week we'll finalize our 4 positions for the tight ends, and then it'll be pretty damn close to release time for the Fantasy Football Guide. Maybe we'll even have it done by the next our 2 weeks from now show. We'll see. But if not, we'll definitely be talking about it very soon. So we make sure you get that once that comes out. But thanks again, everybody, for listening. Have a great week. God bless. Take care. We'll talk again to you soon.